Welcome to KS Biology. Today we are going to start biological classification. So here, what is the biological classification? The biological classification is the process by which scientists classify the organisms into different categories. But based on which criteria they classify the organisms into different categories? Based on morphological characters. So what is the use to classify the organisms? So we have to classify the organisms to study, and moreover while we are studying, so we can avoid the confusion about the organisms. So this is the major use of classifying the organisms. I hope you are clear, right? But since the beginning of the civilization, there have been many attempts to classify the organisms. But those classifications were based on their needs but not a scientific manner. So what are the needs? So organisms are classified based on their needs. So what are the needs? For cloth, so for food, so clothing, shelter. So organisms are classified based on their needs for food, clothing and shelter, right? But for the first time, Aristotle was the first person to classify the organisms based on scientific manner. So Aristotle was the Greek philosopher and also is considered as the father of biology. And he is also considered as the father of zoology. Yes. So we know who is father of biology and who is the father of zoology, who is the father of botany. Theophrastus is considered as the father of botany. Theophrastus. Theophrastus is considered as the father of botany. Right. But Aristotle was the first person to classify the organisms based on scientific manner. He classified the organisms into, right now, he classified the organisms into two types, plants and animals. He also classified the plants into three categories: herbs, shrubs, and trees. Here you may have doubt based on which criteria. So he classified the plants into three categories by using simple morphological characters. By using simple morphological characters. Right. So he also classified the animals into two categories: animals with RBC animals without RBC. Animals without RBC. So the animals which have the red blood corpuscles, those are one group, and animals without RBC, those are another group. Animals with RBC. So which organisms comes under animal with RBC? Vertebrate. See, animals with RBC, these are also called an anima. So what are the examples for this? Vertebrates. Here, animals without RBC, these are also called anima. Example for this, invertebrates. Which one? Invertebrates. So all invertebrates do not have RBC. Yes, there are some exceptions. So except Annelida. Though These members are invertebrates, but they have RBC in their blood. So except Annelida. And moreover, the Annelida members also exhibit closed circulatory system. These members exhibit which one? Closed circulatory system. This is about earlier classification. So which one? Based on our needs, and Aristotle was the first person to classify the organisms by scientific manner. This is the earlier classification. Later on, the Swedish naturalist Carolus Linnaeus proposed two kingdom classification. So who proposed this two kingdom classification? The two kingdom classification was proposed by Carolus Linnaeus. So according to him, what are the two kingdoms? So according to him, the two kingdoms are kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia. So the two kingdom classification was proposed by Carolus Linnaeus. He was a Swedish naturalist, and the kingdom Plantae and the kingdom Animalia. Right? Yes. So what is the main criteria used by him to classify the organisms into two kingdoms? The main criteria used by Linnaeus is the presence and absence of the cell wall. What is the main criterion? So presence and absence of cell wall. So the organism which have cell wall, those are all placed under kingdom Plantae. So the organisms which do not have cell wall, those are all placed under kingdom Animalia. Right? But the two kingdom classification is very easy to classify the organisms, and it is also easy to understand about organisms. But there are some limitations. So several objections are raised against the two kingdom classification proposed by Linnaeus. Sir, what are those objections? Yes. The two kingdom classification did not distinguish between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So it is not differentiate between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and it is not differentiate between, this system did not differentiate between unicellular and multicellular organisms. Yes. So unicellular and multicellular organisms. For example, so if you take the chlamydomonas, the chlamydomonas is a unicellular. It placed along with Spirogyra, or it kept along with Spirogyra. This Spirogyra is a multicellular and the filamentous structure. Spirogyra is a multicellular filamentous structure. And moreover, it is not differentiate between autotrophs and heterotrophs. It is not differentiate, or it is not distinguish between autotrophs and heterotrophs. So for example, the green algae and the fungi. So the fungi is a heterotroph, green algae is so autotroph. Both are placed together under kingdom Plantae because of the presence of cell wall. But they here, if you compare the algae and the fungi, in case of algae, the cell wall is made up of cellulose. But in fungi, the cell wall is made up of chitin. So, though their cell wall composition also different, but they are placed under kingdom Plantae. So, these are the several objections raised against the two kingdom classification. So that it was found to be inadequate. Later on, another scientist came and proposed the three kingdom classification. So what is this three kingdom classification? Who proposed this three kingdom classification? The great three kingdom classification was proposed by Ernest Haeckel. According to him, the three kingdoms are so kingdom protista, so kingdom plantae, and the kingdom animalia. So what he did? He separated all unicellular eukaryotic, all unicellular organisms and kept under kingdom protista. What he did? He separated all unicellular organisms and placed under kingdom protista. So which organism he placed? Prokaryotes, protozoa, amoeba, cyanobacteria. So all the chrysophytes, dinoflagellates, all these members are placed under kingdom protista. And all multicellular green photosynthetic plants are placed under kingdom plantae, and animals are placed under kingdom animalia. So this is the three kingdom classification. But the three kingdom classification did some progression over two kingdom classification, but still it is inadequate. Then later on, another scientist came and proposed the four kingdom classification. So this four kingdom classification was proposed by Copeland. So the four kingdoms, according to him, the four kingdoms are kingdom Monera, so kingdom Protista, kingdom Plantae, kingdom Animalia. Yes. So what he did? He separated all unicellular prokaryotic organisms and placed under kingdom Monera, and all unicellular eukaryotes are placed under kingdom Protista, and all plants are placed under kingdom Plantae, and animals are placed under kingdom Animalia. Still, so when compared to three kingdom classification, the four kingdom classification made so progression, but still it is inadequate. The later on in the year, later on another scientist came and proposed the five kingdom classification. So now five kingdom classification. This five kingdom classification was proposed by R.H. Whittaker. In the year 1969. So who proposed five kingdom classification? The five kingdom classification proposed by R.H. Whittaker in the year 1969. So what is the criteria used by him to classify the organisms into five kingdoms? So the main criteria used by him to classify the organisms into five kingdoms include cell structure, thallus organization, mode of nutrition, reproduction, and evolutionary relationship or phylogenetic relationship. Evolutionary relationship or phylogenetic relationship. So, what are the five kingdoms? According to him, what are the five kingdoms? The five kingdoms are kingdom Monera, kingdom Protista, kingdom Fungi, or it is also called mycota. So kingdom plantae, or metaphyta. Yes, here the kingdom Animalia, also called metazoa. Yes, what he did? See here, he separated all unicellular prokaryotic organisms and placed under kingdom Monera, and all unicellular eukaryotic organisms are placed under kingdom Protista. So all multicellular eukaryotes, loose tissue organization with chitin cell wall organisms are placed under kingdom Fungi or Mycota. So all green photosynthetic autotrophic cellulosic cell walls are placed under kingdom Plantae. All animals are placed under kingdom Animalia. So these are the 5 kingdoms proposed by R.H. Whittaker. Later on, another scientist came and proposed another type of classification, that is 6 kingdom classification. The 6 kingdom classification is also called the 3 domain classification. 3 domain classification. 3 domain classification. So what is this 3 domain? So what is the domain? See here, the domain is a taxon which is higher than kingdom. In first chapter we studied that so the living world, their taxonomical hierarchy or Linnaeus hierarchy. In each which one? Kingdom is a taxon, but it has a highest rank, right? Highest category. But the domain is a taxon which is higher than kingdom, right? So what are the 3 domains and what they did? And based on which criteria they classify the organisms into 6 kingdoms. So based on 60 small ribosomal subunit, that is 16S rRNA as a selectable markers. What is the main criteria used by one? So 6 kingdom classification are also called 3 domain classification. Which is the selectable marker? So by taking small ribosomal subunit, that is 16S rRNA as a selectable marker, they classify the organisms into 6 kingdoms. Who proposed 6 kingdom classification? The 6 kingdom classification was proposed by Carl Woese and his co-workers. The Carl Woese and his co-worker proposed the 6 kingdom classification or 3 domain classification. What is the criteria used by him? So small ribosomal subunit, that is 16S rRNA as a selectable marker, right? So what he did? He divided kingdom Monera into 2 kingdoms, Archaea and Eubacteria. See. So similar to which one? 5 kingdom classification, but the kingdom Monera is divided into Archaea, Archaebacteria and Eubacteria. So kingdom Monera. So it is divided into 2 kingdoms. Which one? Archaebacteria and Eubacteria. And the remaining things: kingdom Protista, kingdom Mycota or fungi, so kingdom Plantae or metaphyta, so kingdom Animalia, metazoa. So these are the 6 kingdoms. But this also called the 3 domain classification. What are the 3 domains? See, the domain Archaea, domain Eubacteria, and the domain Eukarya. So So eukarya means a true carrion. True carrion. So true nucleus has how many kingdoms? Protista. So fungi, plantae, animalia. So I hope you are clear. So these are the 6 kingdom classification. So now the comparative study of the 5 kingdom classification we will discuss in next class.